Hello, Dreamcatchers, and welcome to another exciting day in the Writer's Haven. I am your host, Helena, and with me today is historical fiction writer Pamela Hart. Pamela is author of the book Born of Sin, which is part of a 3-book series that chronicles the troubled life of Pastor J.D. Abraham. The series begins in the late 70s and early 80s and extends into present day. She is currently working on the 2nd book in the series, Born by Fire. Pamela is also a poet and a veteran Army officer who served 20 years in the military and is founder of a crisis management firm called Troop Public Relations. Join me in welcoming Amazon best-selling novelist Pamela Hart. Welcome to the Haven, Pamela.
Thank you, Helena.
And thank you so much for your service.
Oh, it's my pleasure, my honor.
Okay, and let me actually start with that because I'm dying to ask you this question. How much of your military experience plays into your process as a writer and or the content for the novels and the stories that you write?
Well, I think as people, every experience that we have helps form us as people and as authors and as for whatever we do. So I think a little bit of it does show up, but when I'm writing fiction, it's just a story. So and when I'm writing a nonfiction piece, of course, that plays into, but I think my whole personality and all of my experiences wind up into the end product.
Okay, now, and how long have you been pursuing your writing career?
Oh, I came out of the womb writing.
Okay.
I've been writing all my life, and not professionally, of course, but as soon as I got into my career as an Army officer, I started specializing in the Army Public Affairs career field, and just a lot of that was writing and so forth, but
more technical than creative.
Yes, no creative whatsoever. You know, with press releases and so forth. That was it's just hard and fact writing. But as far as writing fiction and making up stories and poetry, I've always done that since as far back as I can remember.
Okay, and did you start off with writing poetry before you went into?
I did. I think every little girl, at least me, would sit at the window and write about the blue jays outside and the grass and the sun. But so yes, I've started off writing poetry, and then in college, experiencing my movement phase, where I was down with the cause and just very in tune to life and change and discovering myself. So I did write a lot of poetry in college, and I probably should have kept that up because looking back at some of those pieces I wrote earlier, they're really profound pieces.
Now, did I read somewhere that you do plan to put out a collection of poetry?
I do. So I do have all of those pieces along the way, and a lot of them were inspired after college and after all of my political movement and so forth. Then, of course, a lot of my poetry was inspired by relationships. And so the poetry and those experiences will go into a relationship memoir. Okay. Because every poem was inspired by someone where I learned something or was inspired by. So it'll be, I'm really excited about that project.
Okay, but your primary project right now is, well, you've completed Born of Sin.
Yes.
Okay, so let's actually start with that book. So what inspired the story?
I was inspired by the original story from an incident that happened in my hometown growing up. So this was back in the late 80s, and there was an incident where a pastor at my local church did some unsavory things, and the congregation and the leadership of the church wanted to oust him, but he refused to go. So in the middle of the night, he broke in and vandalized the church and tore up the Bible, broke all the stained glass windows. And so I couldn't believe it. This doesn't happen in my hometown. And so I thought to myself, what kind of a person, what kind of a childhood must this alleged man of the cloth have had to make him do such a thing? So that planted the seed for me to think about my character. Wow. And so my story has nothing to do with that incident, because in my story, Born of Sin is about a young man who has to decide between the family that abandoned him and the street family that embraced him. And so along the way, I initially started off with thinking about that initial real life pastor, but then I fell in love with my character, and I wanted him to be for good. So it took a different turn, and I just completely changed the story. But that was the beginning of J.D. Abraham.
Wow, that is an awesome story. What kind of research did you do to really bring out the characteristics of all of the characters that are in your book?
Well, having spent so many years thinking about the story, each one of them developed their own deep personalities in my head. So I can tell you each one of them's favorite color, what they like to eat for dinner. So, and that's important, as any writer should do, in truly knowing what your characters are, what they would do, even if it never comes out on the page. But we have to know our characters that much in depth. So regarding research, I can't say that I did a lot about childhood, because that just was all inspired. That's just God inspired to me.
Okay.
What happened in the story.
Okay. Do you have any formal training in writing creatively?
Well, my degree is in English and Communications at the University of Pittsburgh. And so I started off as a journalist. So that became my formal training. And then I did take a few classes, creative writing, interpretive writing, and also while I was at the University of Pittsburgh, I did a minor in drama. So being around film and the drama activities, so that helped all inspire me into blocking and just putting a story on the page to make it as visual as possible.
Right. I mean, because there were a few things that you just said about how you structured, like the character development and, the psychological, what's going on with them economically. I'm trying to remember, there's three parts that we look at. Their physical appearance, all of those things that we just some writers take that very seriously and actually do a character profile. And so they intimately know their characters. Other authors that I've talked to don't really go in depth that way. And so your training really shows me that, okay, given her background and her experience, she's that kind of writer that's going to make sure that she intimately knows her characters. So let's talk about that character development and story development process for you. So you have experience in many different areas, as a technical writer, as a creative writer, and then of course your journalistic background. Talk to us about how you approached building the story and building the characters.
Well, I've gone through a complete evolution. So in the early days when I first began this, I think there are two types of writers. There's the pantser and the plotter. And so I was prototypically the pantser, and that is just flying by the seat of my pants, having an idea, having a story in mind and my characters, and just letting them lead the story and take it away from me, which is why I had to stop and regroup and restart the whole story, the whole book in 2009, because the characters just went awry and lived their own life, and I was just on board for a ride. But that didn't work out well. So I regrouped and had to actually put down some type of outline, in which I followed very loosely. And that didn't happen in the second book. In the second book, I clearly began with an outline, plotted out the entire story. And so I think that's a much better, I can't say much better, because I am truly in love with and proud of the first book. But the second one, you'll see a little bit more structure, a little bit more character development as the story unfolds.
Okay, so because I've heard Connie use those characterizations about writers. It's the pantser, and what was the other?
Plotter.
The plotter, and you lean more towards the plotter.
And I do recommend that for anyone writing, because you can't be on a trip without a roadmap, even though we have GPS nowadays. You just have to have an idea where you go, and that's a part of, I think, my overall process is when I really love Stephen King's way of writing, and I tried to pattern my career after his, ideally. And so his very first thing he does, well, not very first, but one of the things he does every day is take a walk. And throughout that 2 or 3 or 4 mile walk that I take in the morning as well is when I think through my story. I think through the next chapter, or I let the characters come to me and bring out that story. So I'm able to go back to the house and sit down at the keyboard and be a little bit more deliberate and faster in getting the story out.
Okay, now you mentioned outlining. I've heard people talk about outlining and plotting and using those two terms synonymously. And I've seen authors who are very detailed in their outline. And then when they work it loosely, it's more plotting than it is outlining. So tell me, because you mentioned both, which process works best for you? Well,
they're completely different. An outline, in my term, in my definition, is simply what it is, what you would think it would be, a list of bullets. And it could be as simple as bullets, 30 bullets on a page that represent your 30 chapters, or you can do sentences just to give you an idea of how the flow of your story, whether it's a novel, a novelette, or a short story will be. But whereas for a plot, now that goes into a lot of thinking through where the characters are intertwined and the strategy behind what's going to happen in the story.
So you're doing both?
A beginning, a middle, and an end.
Okay.
And throw in the twist and consider all of the settings and the dynamics that go into character development. So a plot is very much more detailed than just an outline.
So you're doing both, or you're doing one or the other?
When I begin a piece, I do both.
Okay, that's great. Yeah. That's great. I have heard people doing one or the other, so it's good to hear that, at least for you, because we all write in the way that works best for us. So you're someone that does both, and I think that's great. And I think that is in keeping with the depth that you go in developing your characters. You would, of course, take the same care in developing the story.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I didn't arrive at that point right away. So had you talked to me 20 years ago, it would be a different conversation that we are in now. But now I truly recommend for any type of author, new or old, but truly get and write down your outline so we can know where the story is going to go.
Okay. So historical fiction, did you pick that genre or did it pick you?
Well, because the story came to me back in the 80s, I definitely started at that point. And it's my fault that it took me 30 years to bring it to life. So I didn't intend for the piece to be, it started off as modern day.
But you could have easily changed it, and you didn't.
Yes, I did not, because the story came to me so vividly in that period of time. Walking those streets in Pittsburgh, because it's set in Pittsburgh as well as North Carolina. So that was important to me, to keep the integrity of the piece as it came to me in that story. But I do love historical fiction. I just love everything about it. The way the research is needed when an author goes into whatever period of time he or she will do, but the research that's required and bringing that history to life in characters. So I love all types of it. And so I do want to do more of it, but I know historical fiction from the 70s and 80s may seem historical fiction to a millennial, but it just seems like a distant memory for me.
Right, and for many of us that are in the same age group. Okay, so you mentioned, or rather I mentioned, that you're an Amazon best-selling novelist, but I also know that you're a self-published author. So let's talk about that a little bit, about your experience in self-publishing and why you chose to go in that direction.
Well, with self-publishing, there are 3 things that I think are advantages over the traditional publishing. And I do respect traditional publishing, and I even I did send out my query letters and so forth, but at the end I was not accepted. But for self-publishing, I think that the top 3 things are you can do it a lot more quickly. So if you have your story edited and all ready to go, you have that professional edit, ideally you can get it on Amazon within 48 hours. So it's the speed. And the second thing is you get to control the content, because as a self-published author, you know what your story should be, and you don't have to depend on X numbers of teams with other traditional teams, publishers, to tell you how your story should be and maybe make it unrecognizable in the end. So you get to pick your cover art, the way your story is told, and that's always appealing. As someone who is an artist, we like our things done the way we want them.
Right.
And the third aspect about self-publishing is, of course, the royalties. With self-publishing, you get to control the price, and the royalties are much more beneficial to a writer than going
Higher.
through.
You get
Higher.
more.
Yes, a lot more money. In the end, you make a lot more money publishing on your own. And that is, of course, if you can promote it, market it, and sell multiple numbers of books.
Okay, okay. So did you use an on-demand publisher, or you just set it up so that the distribution and the production of the books are through an on-demand service?
I did, yes, do print on demand. I published through Amazon with the Create Space.
Okay.
And that was extremely user-friendly, a great product, great experience.
You would recommend it?
I do. There are pros and cons, you know,
Okay.
because there are, I don't know how many self-publishing outlets there are.
Many.
Many, many. Tens of them, if not hundreds by now. So, you know, there are different pros and cons to each of them. But of course, Amazon is the monster.
The premier.
The premier one, yes.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
they do make it quite user-friendly. But you are limited.
So with Amazon, so they take care of the copywriting and all of that for you, or I'm just trying to get a sense of.
No, you still have to do all of those things on your own.
Okay.
The only thing you do to Amazon, you upload a finished product and your cover art. And so you would have to either outsource that with some of a graphic artist, or if you have the talent to do it yourself, you can do your own copy, well not copy, but your own cover art. I really don't recommend that anybody do their own copy editing, because we're too close to it, and it's way better if you get another set of eyes on it. So definitely, absolutely hire a professional editor before you put something out into the public.
Okay, and from cradle to grave, how long did it take for you to write the first book?
The first one, 30 years. And the second one, 3 months.
Well, not 30 years consecutively.
No.
I mean, it just took that time, but just if you figured out from the time that you started working on it, on and off, just total, was it more like 2-3 years? But you just didn't publish it until
30 years.
It took 30.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because I never finished it, because I am victim of no, I can't say that. I am not a procrastinator. I'm a perfectionist. So I'm too much of a perfectionist, and I get overwhelmed with the enormity of a novel. But that was back in the day. And so I had to get over that
okay.
because books are getting shorter. And if you see my book, you know, I have upwards of 300 pages. But nowadays, people publish much shorter pieces. And so you don't have to put out a story that's as lengthy as I was thinking I had to, as long as it's a good story and your characters are developed and people love it.
Okay, so it's a 3-book series.
Yes.
When did you decide that it was going to be a series?
I always intended the first book to be standalone, but because I did not plot it, it was a pantser. I got to the point where, you know, I really, really had to close it up because it was upwards. It was just getting too much, too big, too long. And I had to end it at a point where I knew it definitely needed a conclusion, because I wasn't able to tie up all of those loose ends with some of the characters. We just had some outlying things that I needed to clear. So I thought about the second and the third, and I clearly have an idea of where all 3 of them are. So it's Born of Sin, Born by Fire, and the third one is The Last Born. So it's the Pastor J.D. Abraham Born series.
Okay, okay. Now, 30 years to write the first one, and you thought it would be a standalone. It ended up being a series. At what point during that process do you feel that you evolved as a writer, which also determined how you would engage in the second and third book? Or did that happen with the first book?
It happened near the end of the second book.
Okay.
Because of my involvement with my writers group, and because of my just growing up and just developing as a mature woman, as a mature writer, and just reading a lot more, doing my own continuing education on the craft. So I never stopped learning, never stopped taking webinars, going to conferences, reading other writers' work. So always educating yourself on the process and the craft of your business. So because that continued to grow and continue, I think I developed as a better writer. And at the end of the first one, the second one is, it's like blood. I must do it. There's no choice.
Okay. Now you mentioned the writers group. How important is it to be in a writers group? What benefits did you get out of it?
Because writing is a solitary sport and we tend to get cloistered into our own thinking, our own ideas, and people can be unaware of ideas. They think something's a good idea, but it may not be mass appeal, or it may not be appealing to the audience they intend. So it's best to be in a group where you can have a diverse group of men, women, young, old, different nationalities, to get a good cross-section to take a look at your piece. And then you can truly find out where your niche is, and have them give you advice and feedback. Because so many times I sent my chapters into the group, and they've helped me completely turn it around. Things I'd been thinking of and thinking, of course, obvious to me, weren't so obvious to the other members in the group. So I always recommend that if you find a good writers group, people that aren't your best friends, that are going to automatically tell you that, oh no, everything is great, oh you're the greatest writer. But no, not those people. People that will give you a qualified critique and just tell you where your flaws are and where you can improve and how you can make all of that better. Now
you actually organized, founded a writers group here in Bowie.
Yes, I'm the organizer of the Mitchellville Bowie Writers Group, and in this September we will hit 7 years.
Wow!
And so I established it on the Meetup platform, and we have, as of today, 275 members.
That is awesome.
But typically in every session we average about 10 or 12.
And that's still a good number. That's
it's a really great number.
Yeah, yeah. So how often do they meet?
We meet every 2 weeks, sometimes once a month, depending on everyone's schedule.
Okay.
But it's a wonderful group of people, and as we started out in 2011, none of us in the group had published any novels. And now there's one woman who has at least 12.
Wow.
So I
only
have my barely 1.9. So it's just been a great feeding ground, very fertile environment for us to get together and help each other and share information.
Okay, great. Now speaking of the 9 and the 1.9, and then of course your third book in the series, when are you projecting to have those ready and available?
I'm absolutely projecting Born by Fire to come out at the end of this year.
Okay, great.
And so that gives me
awesome.
A good 5 months to do the necessary promoting to make sure I can, it has a great launch and that it's successful.
Okay.
Because I recommend anybody who's about to launch a product, you can't just upload it to Amazon and expect people to find it and buy it. So there's truly a process, a marketing process that goes along with that if you are intending to publish. I would say set it out 5, no more than 4 months out, and just begin the marketing process.
Okay, great. Look forward to seeing that and having you back on the show to talk about it.
I would love it.
Both of them, the 2 and the 3. Any parting words? What advice would you give to aspiring writers out there who are on their journey trying to get to where you are in the spectrum of
well,
writing?
I am not the best case to follow, but I recommend everyone who has a desire to write to just not think of it as some overwhelming thing. You just sit down and actually write, and get that education. Continue to read every day, because the more you read, the better your writing becomes. So get the information and
good
and
literature.
just study.
Good literature.
Yes, and
which is important.
Start with Stephen King's On Writing Memoir. It will definitely put you on the right track.
Pamela, the cover of the book, absolutely beautiful. Talk to me about what inspired it.
Well, the main character doesn't reveal himself, his true self, throughout the book.
Okay. Well, this is a absolute beautiful cover, and you and I both know how important it is to have the right cover on your work, because it will immediately attract or make people say, I'm going to move on to the next book, and I picked that one up. But this is an excellent read, so Dreamcatchers, make sure you get it. And I hope you enjoyed my chat with author Pamela Hart Vines. You can follow her writer's journey on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, or visit her website at PamelaHartVines.com. Well, that wraps our second season of The Writer's Haven, and I can't wait to see you next season, when our guests will include Walter Mosley, Victoria Christopher Murray, Tina McElroy Anza, Donna Hill, Lolita Fowles, and so many great names in American literature. So tune in. And as always, you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Writers Haven Show. And tune in to our YouTube, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, Sonos, Alexa, SoundCloud, and Spotify channels to stream our shows and subscribe. I look forward to seeing you next season, and until then, catch fire on purpose.
Here we go. We're gonna go out there in the rain. You're gonna get wet. All right, here we go. Okay, quick. Oh yeah, yes. So much fun. Mwah. Yeah, Dad. We're getting so wet. Oh,
Everybody has a dream. Mine was to see the ocean. And with a little help, I made it.
This is the moment I knew. His future had no boundaries.
There are some moments only the forest can inspire. Find yours at discovertheforest.org.